We wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for the volunteers. When I look back, the years and years of effort that were put into it has made this all possible. If I had a moment to spend with each volunteer, I'd probably give them a big hug and say thank you for helping my dreams, aviation's dreams, come true.
Looking back at EAA, a couple guys in a basement, a vision of being able to build their own airplanes, get together once a year for what they called a convention, and then to think of today that it is really the underpinning of general aviation. The vision that Paul had, he probably had no idea that he was going to be personally responsible for keeping general aviation vibrant in the United States.
Well, good evening and welcome to Theater in the Woods. We are going to celebrate 50 years of being in Oshkosh, 50 consecutive fly-ins here at Whitman Regional Airport. And thank you for joining us. Let's see, how many of you are from out of town? Good, good, good. How many of you have wet shoes yet? Good, we're dried out. That's a very good thing. How many is this your first time at Oshkosh? A couple of first timers. Let's give them a warm Oshkosh. Well, tonight we're going to reminisce about the move to Oshkosh all the way through the 2010s and share some stories with some EAA members that you may know or may have heard of, and we're going to enjoy their stories. But first, we cannot start this evening without hearing from our founder, Paul Poberezny.
I looked at within 300 miles of Milwaukee for airports and all that. Then nothing east because of the lake. What we needed is a large enough airport for growth, a community that could supply the materials, housing, mechanical help that you could hire in the future, which building trades and things of that nature. And logistics is like building a community for you. Then I got in this tanker, KC-97, I flew up here and one afternoon late, and I circled the airport and I circled the whole area and the tower. I remember asked, what's going on? And I said, oh, I'm just looking. And that's all I told them. Then I told our directors what we planned to do, and they agreed. And I said, we're not going to have a fly-in this year. Let's let all our members know, unless we meet the standards that we set forth for our organization. You tell about people came out, Steve Whitman, Dorothy, my wife, Ray, volunteers. We graded the land. We've never seen so many stones, like potatoes out there, and rented some land for auto parking, seeded it. We had our first fly-in.
If you look back to the beginning, since day one, the annual EAA convention, Milwaukee, Rockford, Oshkosh, has always been administered and operated by volunteers, as it is today. Today, an army of 5,000 people, supplemented by staff, operate Oshkosh, the world's greatest aviation event. And when you think of the logistics, to park thousands of airplanes, to get the cars parked, a campsite that requires care 24 hours a day, scheduling hundreds of workshops and forums, the list goes on and on. It's a logistical nightmare, but it's also a logistical miracle. And it's done by volunteers who are passionate and believe in what they're doing, with their only pay being the success of the event and the recognition, the good feeling of a job well done, and they've made a contribution to something they believe in, and that's aviation.
Well, moving up here from, the Milwaukee area was kind of a shock to me, but I liked it right away. I enjoyed being here, and they were all also supportive and all greeted us with open arms. So there was nothing left for us to do but be friendly right back, and we were. And they opened up their homes to us. They'd look forward to the people coming back year after year. And the university gave us the rooms they rented rooms out. They were a big help. Big thank you for coming, and I hope they enjoyed as much as we all did, because it was a very happy, joyful thing, even for us who had to work so hard. But we always came back and worked harder every year. And the people are so nice. I think they're special.
A very special way to open this evening with words from Paul, from Tom, and from Audrey, the Poberezny family, obviously so influential and integral in the success of this organization. But there are many other people who helped bring Oshkosh to life, as it were. Joining me on the stage is Judy Miller. I didn't know you had your own musical introduction. Sort of like a football game, or a baseball game. You got walk-on music. Anyway, Judy was in charge of Theater in the Woods for many years, and you may recognize the name Shoulder. Her mom and dad, Ray and Bernice Shoulder, longtime volunteers. Ray was at every one of the fly-ins except 1953 until his accident. 53 is that? Yeah. Up until his passing a few years ago. Jerry Burke, who, if you are from the Oshkosh, Fox Valley area, you recognize from WBAY Channel 2. Jerry has the distinction of having either covered this as a news event or volunteered for all 50 of our flying conventions here at Oshkosh. And Jim Gorman, who was a board member and involved in the initial move from Rockford to Oshkosh. And Jim, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about what precipitated having to move from Rockford and some of the trials and tribulations
started explaining to me, I said, oh, you mean model airplanes? And so he said, no, it's a little bigger than that. And that's all he said. But he says, I think you really will like it. So I came out here, and he told me where to go. It was right below the tower, the old tower. And I met this guy named Paul Poberezny. And Paul says, well, tell me about you. And I told him about me and ex-Air Force. I told him about my uncle, whom I'm named after, who was shot down in the Second World War in B-24. Paul became my instant friend. He just was so genuine. And then I met Audrey. And then I met Paul Poberezny. And my initial reaction was, what cool people. I didn't count how many planes were here that year. I think, if I had to guess, less than 500. I think we were here that day.
Oh yeah, I was here the first.
550 days?
Yeah, I'll tell you the truth, I hate to guess. I think there were even more than that.
Okay, 4,000. So I don't know how exactly, but it was very small. And you're right, Steve. The cabin was very small. We didn't get, I think it was 73 or 74. We had our first ultralights. They were right behind the tower. It was a very probably from here. If you go from our stage out to the fence line, that was as big as the landing area was for the ultralights. And very few had wheels. Most of them you were running along with this lawnmower behind you, and you try to take off, and we had multiple incidents that year where they didn't get up over the trees. But that's kind of where it's at.
And through the years, you've covered a number of significant events here at Oshkosh. We were talking earlier today that probably 1985 was a real turning point for the show with Concord. And you're actually going to do a program dedicated to producing that.
EAA started, a little side note, when the program first came here to Oshkosh, I asked Paul, I said, what time's the air show? They were doing a show, 5 hours. And he was firm on this until about 76, 77. I think he was factored, and finally relented and said, okay, we'll call it an air show. And that's where it went from there. And EAA was gradually growing. We didn't really have a military presence at that time. There would be maybe one would show up. It was not like we had 35 people. But in 85, when Concord came for the very first time, for those aviation, to put it that way.
So that's 1985. We're going to talk in depth about that on Thursday night.
Yep.
And we actually have a couple of Concord representatives who are going to join us in just a little bit as well. Jim?
I've got one little story about the Concorde coming here. We had, after it came here, we had the chance to have dinner with the pilot.
Captain Cook.
Yeah, and you remember he did a touch and go?
Well,
Okay.
wait till you hear the story Thursday night on that one.
Okay. And he said during dinner, you know, when I get back to England, they are going to screw my balls to the floor for doing that.
How many of you were here for the 85? Oh, that was when the touch and go, the runway was 6,001 feet that year. And Captain Cook had to put it down right at the edge of the runway. He had been here in March, and he said, ooh, this is going to be tight. So he touched it right down at the beginning of the runway at 18, I'm sorry. And he came along, and all of a sudden he went, and they kicked the afterburners on, and up she went. And everybody, even the guys in the tower went, whoa, and I won't say the word. But nobody knew he was going to do that, not a soul. And that was a moment, and wow, I'll tell you, there's a guy that's a cameraman right over here, is my son, Christopher. He was 2 years, how many of you remember anything from when you were 2 years old? He was 2, and that made such an impression on him at that time. When it came back in '88, he wanted to meet Captain Cook, who was so gracious, picked Christopher up, held him. We got a family photo that it's our prize photo in the family. And he wanted so bad to ride Concorde. And in '94, Tom invited us to go up to Toronto to bring her in from Toronto. And so our son got to fulfill his dream. His bucket list started very early in life.
Judy, growing up with Ray and
What was
Bernice.
her name again?
Yeah,
I don't know.
with Ray and Bernice and being so involved with EAA, what are some of the stories or events that you remember from those early days?
Well, I know Mom and Audrey always talked about how they went out in the fields and plowed the grass with these very big tractors, and one time my dad couldn't find them, and here they are, and they said, oh, the tower could find them. And they were just out plowing, and this great big, Ford tractors.
Right.
I gotta say Ford,
And of course, you've been involved almost your entire life.
Yeah.
And, your dad, Ray, took over the theater, making the theater in the woods. And the facility that we're sitting in here today is a little different than the originals that once the stage was put up. If you can imagine, it was great for those of us on the stage if it was inclement weather because the roof ended at the edge of the stage, so all y'all would have been in the rain. But that changed one year, a very strong suggestion from your mother.
Yes, well, my mother was very forceful, if anybody knew her. And one day then she said, it was raining and people were standing out in the rain. She said to Tom, Tom, next year I want that roof extended all the way out there. And he said, yes, ma'am. Next year the roof was there, so anybody have to go in the rain, you can thank my mother for that.
The reason I happened to find this out when we were talking before we came out here. That happened the year after Chuck Yeager was up here. It was pouring rain to beat the band. This place was packed. Nobody moved. Chuck wouldn't let them.
True. And your dad sort of let you take over the reins of Theater in the Woods, and you have the distinction of probably being one of the only people who's ever gotten on the phone and called Houston, Texas, and said, Houston, we have a problem.
We were going to have a live broadcast with the shuttle as it was flying around. I don't even know where it was. Must have been because he sent me a picture of the field. And that morning I said, I think we better do a run through. So I did have a direct line to Houston. I lost it though. I'm sure they cut me off. And so I called Houston and they said, that sounds like a real good idea. So I had the guys all here and we tried to connect and it wouldn't work. So I got on the phone and at that time we didn't have cell phones. It was just regular landlines. And I got to say, Houston, we have a problem. I thought that guy was going to drop the phone.
But you eventually solved the problem, and
it was just a glitch on their part that they just had to push a different button.
So it's amazing when you think about it that the Theater in the Woods has communicated with space.
We did, and nobody believed it at the time because it was so clear.
Right.
They thought it was fake, but it was true. We did that twice, once with the shuttle and once with the space station.
So before we wrap up this segment, any last words that you'd like to share with the audience about the early days, Jim?
No, I think you've pretty well covered it.
Okay. You're, by the way, the steerman that the Staggerwing that you flew in 1970 is here on the field as well.
I brought the Staggerwing up in 1970, which was the first year,
Yep.
and it's back here again. And I've owned it all that time, so I'm just glad to have it here.
Oh, good.
And
Congratulations.
we're glad you're here.
Well, with that, we'll wrap up this segment. Thank you, Judy Miller, Jerry Burke, Jim Gorman, for sharing your memories with us. We're going to move on into the 70s.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jim. And welcome back. You can see we have changed faces here. We'll introduce you to our next set of panelists. Harry Chapin, who was with the Snowbirds when they first appeared here in 1975, correct?
76.
76, all right. Rob Unger, we referenced Carl Unger and Breezy joining us as well. Gene Soucy, a longtime aerobatic pilot who has performed at Oshkosh for a number of years. Welcome, Gene.
Yeah.
And of course, Mr. Hollywood, Danny Clishan. Rob, we'll start off with you. Your dad and the Breezy were such an integral part of the early days. I mean, you couldn't come to this event without seeing your dad in the red vest and flying the Breezy and flying volunteers. Tell us a little bit about your experiences helping shepherd the volunteers in that line.
Well, my father first showed up at the 1965 Rockford Air Show, where the airplane made its debut and became an instant sensation. People lined up and gathered and wanted a ride. And it was kind of, he had this knack to where he can just pick somebody out of the crowd that knew they would really get a thrill out of this experience that he had. He loved to share it with everybody. Over the years, when I got older, I was able to help him put people on the airplane and crowd control, if you will. And then, of course, fly the airplane, and I got to fly many people at the air shows. It was a wonderful thing. And hopefully, down the road, we can continue that and reintroduce it back to AirVenture here at Oshkosh.
Well, and you helped organize the Breezy reunion several years ago, isn't it?
Yep. 2014 was the 50th year for Breezy Design. Breezy's come in from all over the country. I got to tell you, two guys. One guy came in from Prescott, Arizona, 6 days on a Breezy, wow. And Washington State, Yakima, Washington State. I mean, that's a 7-8 day trip. That was a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
They came in all over the country. We celebrated all week with little appearances and talks and things like that. It was really nice celebration. Unfortunately, my dad passed away the year before. Wanted me to go on with it. And I did. And one of the most touching things of that is the Breezys all got together, took off, and they did a missing man formation for my dad. And it was very touching.
Yes. And we have a couple of pictures. Hopefully they can pop up on the screens here. One is...
okay.
Breezy.
Yeah, that's the...
That is the... right at the 65 Rockford Air Show. The three gentlemen on there, of course, my dad being in the front seat.
Okay.
Charlie Roloff to the left, and Bob Lepotsky. They're all co-designers. Young corporate pilots at the time, and they wanted to have something fun, get out of the hectic commercial aviation part of it, and just kind of get back to the grassroots and have some fun, and Breezy was born.
Well, and Breezy is a fun ride. I had the opportunity to fly with your dad once, and I think it took about a week to get all the bugs out of my teeth. I was smiling so much. Another picture, hopefully we've got it, is someone who's just absolutely begging for a ride.
Oh.
Yeah. Because well, here's a good one too. That's your daughter, Paul.
That is my daughter Gracie. This was at 2007. We had a Breezy gathering. I wanted to honor my dad, just because. Until he started getting older and stuff. I didn't want to wait till the end. Right. 2007, we had a Breezy gathering. Paul wanted to come over and speak. Paul and my dad were really good friends. They had a great camaraderie together. Paul loved the airplane. Gracie and her smile just attracted Paul. Paul came over and he loves kids. He's a very kind man. I've known him since I was a kid. We marveled when he would fly the helicopter to the Pioneer Inn, and we'd all watch him go into the hotel, the same hotel we're staying at, and we just couldn't believe it. But Paul, I wanted to show this picture because it just shows he's such a kind person. He loves children, and he loves everybody. And I don't know if Gracie remembers it. She's in the audience tonight, 17-year-old senior in high school, and she's just as beautiful as she was as she is right there.
And great to have you here, and still coming back to Oshkosh. And being I guess we'll call you a legacy volunteer. Dad obviously got you started. Where are you volunteering these days?
Well, I volunteer still giving rides if I can. We're trying to reintroduce that. Years ago, I used to work with a gentleman named Tom Sheepek. And Tom Sheepek in EAA used to bring the dignitaries and VIPs and people who wanted to ride on the airline. One
quite a few stick out, but one in particular is Captain Cook from the Concorde. You'll probably hear his name a bunch tonight. It's just he's a great guy. And in 1985, when the Concorde showed up, and he was brought over to get a breezy ride, him and my dad hit it off, and they were just friends forever. He rode on that airplane 10 times that summer. And we took the whole crew for a ride, and they just loved it. Just loved it. It's a big talk of the town.
Harry, we'll move on to you because the Snowbirds were the very first jet team to appear at Oshkosh. And what precipitated bringing the team here? How did little old EAA land the Snowbirds?
I was number 7. I wasn't in the front. I was in the back, and I just did what I was told. I'm sure somebody phoned and asked for the Snowbirds, and they said sure. But I don't know.
What were your impressions when you touched down or flew over the first time?
I was embarrassed because we were given a time on target here. Mm-hmm. Apparently it was going to be busy. That's what they told us. And we should be here exactly 2 o'clock. Yeah. So we took off from London, Ontario, and we flew over here, and we phoned up and said, yeah, we're here. And the guy in the tower was not all that polite and said, you're going to have to wait 15 minutes and hold 15 minutes because you're late by 1 hour exactly. And we forgot that time change thing. London was a really good party, I think. Anyway, a jet getting to a destination doesn't have a whole bunch of extra gas, and we didn't. And I remember watching the gas gauge going down, and that last 15 minutes was forever. And finally, the guy in the tower said, come down and land, and no messing around, just land. But we have to put on our show. No, you land. So I was embarrassed. That was my first impression of Oshkosh. I tried to sell my red suit, and nobody would buy it.
But you made up for it throughout the week with your performances.
Apparently.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're happy to have the Snowbirds back several years ago. Yep. And what a pleasant team that was. Was your team as nice as the ones who were here a few years ago?
We were way better looking and smarter and all of that.
Good.
We could dance better. We could do all of that stuff better. We're just a little bit late getting there, that's all.
I see. Yeah. So have you been back to Oshkosh since, until this year?
No. I'm still embarrassed.
And
so I was here early tonight. I was 15 minutes early.
There you go. That's very nice of you. Thank you. So what are your impressions from 1976 to 2019?
Wow. The museum was a wow today. I just, big lump in my throat. Yeah. It was just so neat. And there's a few people in America, and they were all here today. I thought they all went to Walmart, but no, they were coming here.
Usually they go to Walmart after dark, after all the fun stuff is over.
It is just incredible, the participation here, and it just blows my mind that the goings on.
It is an incredible event.
Yep.
And moving on to Gene, Susie. Gene, you've flown here several times. Do you remember your first time flying here?
Well,
yeah.
I should. But that summer was the year we went to the World Aerobatic Championships. I was on the US Aerobatic team.
Yeah.
And we had just spent like 6 weeks in England training and then 2 weeks with the contest. And we did win the World Championships. And the C5 brought us back and dumped us off in Delaware, and we put our airplanes together and flew over here and showed up as the world champion. So it was really a big kick.
Yeah. So you were flying the
little pit
specials at the time. Yeah. The Red, and you were performing as the Red Devils.
So we flew the show. Tom and Charlie and I each did solo acts, and then we flew together as Red Devils. And I think this was the first place in the States we ever did the Red Devil act, because we put it together over in Europe as we were training for the championships. In the spare time, we kind of started flying together.
And then you spent the next 25 years flying together.
25 years with those guys.
The longest running civilian act with the same lineup Not the same airplanes, though.
No,
Same guys, different airplanes. What was the transition like from the pits to the Kristen Eagle?
oh, the Eagle was faster cross country
That's a good thing.
and had a bigger baggage compartment. And it snap rolled pretty good.
Good.
You know, the little Pitts was a great snap rolling airplane, but the Eagle was a fantastic airplane too.
Good. And after the Eagles team retired, you flew several different airplanes before you landed with the Showcat, correct? You had an extra at one
Yeah, I
time?
flew the extra 300 for several years. And then the Showcat with the wing walking with Teresa Stokes.
Yes.
And the night show you're going to see this week. I'm still doing that
Yeah, Teresa is here in the audience.
somewhere.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey.
And she's been walking on your wing for several years.
Yeah, since 86.
Since
88.
88.
Yeah,
Wow.
30 years, yeah.
So, a wonderful partnership for the both of you, both the solo show that you do, but also the wing walking act is always a treat.
You know, another thing, I started with the airline, North Central Airlines in 1974, and I used to bid my trips because North Central had many flights in here
Right.
to Chicago and even had a flight to Green Bay, but I'd come up here and do the air show, and then when I had to go to work, I'd jump seat to Chicago and fly in Oshkosh overnight. And I'd come up here and stay in a hotel and with the guys all week, even though I was at work, so it worked out pretty cool, yeah.
So you mentioned Rob, you mentioned the Pioneer Inn. Were you, Danny, you and Gene, were you housed at the Pioneer as well?
We were housed at the Pioneer, and the great fun was getting to it after we had a debriefing at a place on the corner that we can't talk about it anymore. There was some pretty adventurous driving, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And I understand that you might have had an incident with the wallpaper at the hotel at one point?
There were many incidents back in those days. We had a lot of fun, let me put it that way, yeah. And the Pioneer is still missed very much because of its location on the Fox River and on Lake Winnebago. It was just a wonderful place to be close to the field and to kick back. They had all the things that we needed at the Pioneer Lounge and restaurant.
Yeah. They had a restaurant, they had beds,
They had
telephones.
beds too, yeah.
It was all good. Danny, what was your first year?
It
announcing
was,
here?
as Gene was speaking, it was 76, and I was invited to come up, and I had not announced here before, so the Red Devils are going to fly, and they're in the pit specials, of course, that are in the museum now, and their signature move on takeoff with both airplanes over the course of their 25 years was a very exciting formation snap roll. So when that happened, Charlie Hillard flew out of the snap roll and started to descend and headed to the other runway, not the air show runway. And this leads to Paul and some of Paul's traits. Paul on this field could be everywhere at the same time. A lot of people swore he could levitate. So Charlie Hillard landed on the other runway, way down there. And he fell out of the formation because there was a spark in the cockpit. He didn't know what the spark was from, so very wisely he terminated the flight. So he landed, rolled out, and got off the main runway over here onto the taxiway, and he said, as soon as I stopped the airplane on that taxiway, there was a head looking from behind me, and it was Paul saying, "Is everything okay?" Charlie said, "I do not know how he got over there that fast. It's physically impossible." And another piece of that story is that Gino left wing and Tommy Poberezny on the right wing, they just continued on with the flight as if nothing had happened. It was marvelous showmanship. But later, I asked this guy, I said, Gino, what went on in your mind when Charlie dropped out? Were you concerned about Charlie, or were you concerned about, what was on your mind? What did you think about? And without hesitation, he said, Gino finally gets to leave. And that's the truth, isn't it? The ability for Paul to play practical jokes is legendary. And the boss that we had before Steve took over on the announcer stand as our chairman was Roscoe Morton, who volunteered continuously for over 50 years in that position. And Roscoe, as every announcer, you're standing up, and your subject matter is in the sky, so your head is always up to whoever's flying. And Roscoe is a pretty serious guy, and he's got a power of concentration. So he's out on what's the announcer's stand now, and he's looking up, and he's concentrating like crazy, and somebody's flying. And Poberezny from down below started to rise up with his face until he was looking down at Roscoe, because he was taller than Roscoe. And from being an eloquent air show announcer, we heard So just like Gino, I said, what went through your mind when that happened? And Roscoe said that I would either be kissed or fired. No matter what happened, he said it wasn't going to be pretty. He recovered the next day, and all was well. It leads me to some other great things. Over the course of the years here, all these programs in the Theater in the Woods, Paul and Audrey were big in the community. They visited a lot of the supper clubs in town, and there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Scheibinger. Thank you for reminding me of that. They heard Joe at one of the supper clubs. He a very talented man, knew a lot of songs, a lot of repertoire. And Paul, in his great wisdom, said, will you volunteer for the EAA? And Joe said without hesitation, yes, I will. So they would put Joe at the base of the stage over here with this big, giant organ. And in between the programs, or before the program started, Joe would take requests from the audience. This is a lot like Stump the Stars. So one night, somebody asked him, when you see Paul out in the supper clubs, or when you see him here and you're working, does he ever request a song? He said, oh yes, without a shadow of a doubt. Paul has a favorite polka. He loved to dance, he loved the polka. And I said, what is it? He said, it's the polka, in heaven they have no beer. So what we're going to do is have a little fun with you, the audience, and these monitors. We're going to turn up the house lights now. And on the monitor, Steve and the guys backstage are going to put the lyrics of Frankie Yankovic and the Polka Kings on our screen. They're going to do that now, as we rehearse. Please. All right, the house lights are going up. Next, we need the words on the screen.
Yep.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
The screens.
I hope.
I think there's one on the back side.
There we go.
Okay, now you can read this, and the great thing about this is the first set of lyrics and the last set of lyrics are the same. All right, now it's a great song for audience participation because it's a la-la song. In the middle, it goes la, 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 for about 5 choruses. So that's going to be your part. So here's what I want. We got to get all the right, in heaven they have no beer, and I know you probably did this, but I have to get my props out to make this a real German drinking song. And you can use your imagination. And I, on the other hand, have to be realistic in show business. So I'm only doing this for theatrics. Okay, now, for Paul and Audrey, would you stand up and sing with us? Yeah, let's do it. And just hoist your imaginary glass in the air. Now what we're going to do to these words are add the music. And then you sing along with Frankie and the crew. All right, let's hit the music, and everybody's going to sing. You're going to get real loud, and you're going to do the la-la part.
Look at it.
Yeah, you got it. Okay.
In heaven there is no beer. That's why we drink it here. And when we're gone from here, all our friends will be here. La 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 la.
Get ready for the la-la now. During the Miss and Miss EAA pageant, they would play these songs while the judges made their decisions.
There is no beer.
Audrey Poberezny and I would polka and we'd sing.
Drink it here.
Okay, let's get real loud.
And when we're come from here. All our friends will be drinking our beer. La 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 la.
See how easy it is? La 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 la.
All our friends will be drinking our beer.
You're free to have one after the program is over. You folks were great. Please be seated. Please be comfortable. And thank you for that tribute to Paul and Audrey.
And I'd like to thank our panelists for taking us back to the 1970s. Harry Chapin, welcome back. Don't be embarrassed anymore. It's all right. Rob Unger, thank you.
Thank you.
Gene Soucy, we'll see you flying this week. And the one and only Mr. Hollywood, Danny Clishman. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. Hey!
He's done that all my life.
You ready? And now we move into the 1980s, a very pivotal decade that we've already talked a little bit about with Concorde. And joining me right now, we have Greg Anderson, who was very instrumental in helping raise the money and get the museum and the Aviation Center open. Welcome back, Greg.
Thank you.
A name that is almost synonymous with the EAA, that is Rutan. This is Dick Rutan, of course. Welcome back. Gene McNeely, who you know from the Aeroshell team, and we're going to give a little insight that you might not know about Gene and his tie to EAA in the 80s. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you.
And Les Brody with the Concorde. Glad to have you here.
Thanks very
and
much.
Would you like to introduce your two
Yes, I have
crewmates?
with me I have Captain Richard Owen, who's a training captain on Concorde, and I've got Senior Engineer Officer Trevor Norcott, who is one of our main trainers on the senior engineering side of Concorde as well.
Excellent.
And none of us have been to Oshkosh before, but we've had a great day here today. Had a pool, and we've been up in the tri-motor, etc. So now we're going to represent the Concorde fleet.
Very good, very good. I want to actually start with Dick, and we're actually going to back up into the 70s because your brother Bert designed the Very Easy, and it was debuted here in 1975, is that correct? And you flew it here, setting a distance record for the airplane as well.
That's right, it was Class 1A, and we flew it between here and Menominee. Spent the whole day, and that was my first induction to long-range flying. And of course, we stayed with it a long time and ended up flying farther than any airplane has ever flown.
There's quite an
will
evolution.
ever fly.
What was the crowd's reaction to the Very Easy in 1975?
Well, the crowd reaction was really interesting. Of course, you know, the EAA is a very welcoming place, but you know, here Bert shows up with an airplane that's built out of bed sheets and honey and flying backwards, and of course, it's going to enlist somebody's interest for sure. So anyway, it evolved from that, and he ended up building a home built that made astronauts. So that's the evolution.
What are your first impressions of Oshkosh when you landed that first day?
Well, it's overwhelmed. You know, back in those days, it was before cell phones. You know, back in the old days, you know, no cell phones and no internet, thank goodness. And flying Volkswagen engines. So from Volkswagen engines to rockets that can go into space. You know, it's all the spirit of the EAA. It all started right here because you have the freedom, thanks to Paul, and they gave us the freedom to innovate and build airplanes. You know, and I built a couple, and in the back of my Bearcoot it says, because you're required to put this statement, it says, this airplane does not comply with the FAA standards, da, 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 da. It's a requirement, it's a law, right? And underneath that I put my own. And I did it after I got inspected. And what it said was, it says, that's why it's more efficient and more fun, and it's safer and more fun and more fun to fly.
And just a few years after that, we saw Voyager for the first time. And I remember the pictures from that year of the outline in the grass on the flight line where you could see where the grass was still green under the fuselage and wings of the airplane, and everything else around it was absolutely trampled down by everybody looking at that airplane.
Well, that memory of 1984, it's an interesting number. No, anyway, Gene and I flew it in here from Menominee or from someplace, and we orbited overhead until the air show was done. And when the air show was done, we brought it down and landed it and taxied in to Air Show Center. And the reception that we received was, you know, monumental. It was very rewarding to see that. And I kept having to remind people, I says, hey, we ain't done this yet. Yeah. But anyway, it was going to be 2 years after that we did actually successfully, much to my surprise, fly around the world unrefueled on the first try. And I'm still amazing from that. But the memory of that, of circling overhead, and everybody pulled out a white handkerchief. And we looked down, Gene and I looked down, and here's the whole crowd, the Oshkosh ground, and everybody had a white handkerchief. I kept thinking, do they know we haven't flown around the world yet? But we landed, and one of the most memorable things about that whole reception that we had here at Oshkosh in 1984 was one person, and I'll never forget. And outside of my own mother, Audrey, when we climbed out of the airplane that day and had a hug by Audrey, and I thought, that has got to be the sweetest, most wonderful person that ever drew a breath of air. And it was a real honor to meet her and know her. And she put up with Paul and Tom all these years, and you know, God bless her, and I kiss her for that.
Steve, yep. I think a lot of us probably remember that flying in and the display and the reception that the Pobereznys and EAA members gave the Voyager team. But a memory that sticks with me of that day is after you were on the flight line for a while, we decided to put it in the Weeks hangar for the night. And several people went over to push it in, and as we were getting it set up, it had to fit just right over there. It's a big airplane. And I saw a fellow walking along the leading edge of the long wing, and I later found out it was John Rantz who designed the airfoil. And he was walking along and writing in a little notebook along the leading edge of this unique airplane. And I asked him what he was doing. And he said, I'm counting the bug strikes, the little smushes of bug bodies on the leading edge of the wing. And I'm going to put that in the computer and calculate the laminar airflow disturbance that those bug strikes caused over 9 days or whatever it was.
3 minutes and 44 seconds.
And I thought, if anybody's going to do this, these guys are going to do it because they've thought of everything. And you landed with not too many gallons anyway. It was that kind of calculation. Really disciplined approach to the event.
There's just a real quick note on that. John Rantz was the airfoil genius, but he forgot one thing. and that is what happens to his airfoil in rain. And in Mojave, we didn't have a chance to test it in rain. And Gene and I were out on the eastern edge of the valley, and we were doing some tests. I looked over there, and there was a little verga of rain, so I thought, well, heck, we'll just punch into it. And we punched into the rain, and it lost 62% of its lift off the canard, and the nose started down. And no matter what I could do, I couldn't pull back. I pulled back, full forward, power, everything. There was no way we can get it up. And I looked, and there was no way that I could turn Voyager around and fly back out of it. And I actually ordered Gina to get her parachute on and get out. And she was in the process of putting her parachute on. And I thought, what a shame. Nobody's ever going to know what happened or why it happened. They just see the wreckage. And then she come up and says, well, what are you going to do? And I says, well, I'm going to stay here and see if I can save the airplane, but you're getting out. And I ordered her to bail out. And as hard-headed, God bless her, as hard-headed as she was, she unclipped her parachute, threw it in the back, and says, if you're staying, so am I. And I looked at her and I said, okay, girl, I give you one chance to live, because there was no survival of this thing. It couldn't pull the nose up. We were going to crash in the high desert. But for some reason, at the last minute, we flew out of this thing, and it started to dry out. And as it dried out and the rain stopped, the nose came up. Anyway, I flew it back to Bert, and fortunately, Bert is alive today for one reason. He was not at the airport that day, because when I called him up and I says, hey, Bert, and I told him what happened, and he looked at me, or he said over the telephone, he said, well, Dick, don't fly in the rain. Anyway, they went back, and John Ronth put it in a wind tunnel and put some vortex generators on it, and he fixed that. And we never had another chance to test that because there wasn't any rain, and we found ourselves. And the first time it flew in rain after his test, for a test, was going through Typhoon Marge out over Guam. And we're in heavy rain. And it worked.
Greg, as we mentioned, you were very instrumental in bringing the Aviation Center and the museum to life here. What was the process that you went through with Tom to raise the money and get this started?
Well, I started in '83, and we were just into our Wings on Dreams capital campaign for the huge amount of money of $10 million, which is a lot of money, but now there are campaigns that are hundreds of millions and billions. But it was a great exercise that sticks in my memory very vividly. We generated a lot of support and drew a lot of blue ribbon support from people like Barry Goldwater, who chaired the campaign, John Denver, Baron Hilton, Tom Watson, on and on. People came up to stand beside Paul and Tom and EAA members to build this facility. And the chapter network was very active. Jerry Traeger and a team of chapter leaders generated the advocacy program and the support from the membership. The members really pushed it over the top. We were generating support from foundations and corporations, but when we got close to $10 million, we started the Charter Contributors Campaign, and up in the Whitman Concourse in the museum today are about 5,000 bricks, and I walk through there today, Steve, and people are pointing to it and smiling like it's their piece of this place. And the Wings on Dreams campaign was an effort to, be permanent here in Oshkosh, but to capture the spirit of AirVenture and put it in a facility that would generate that excitement and that enthusiasm year-round, and then also be that kind of focal point that draws the interest and enthusiasm from people who come to AirVenture, and then send it out to chapters and young people and aviation organizations around the world, really. There's bricks up there from Oshkosh, and there's other bricks from, I remember one from Ouagadougou, Upper Volta, West Africa, that came in at the tail end of the campaign. So it was a great show of EAA spirit at a time when the economy wasn't the best, but people believed in this cause, and of course Paul and Tom was very much in a leadership position in that campaign. We had an opening that 1983 AirVenture, or flying at that time, and I know Baron Hilton was the master of ceremonies. It was a pretty powerful moment. It was my first second AirVenture out of now 37. I keep coming back, but it was the time I also realized on July 30th it was my anniversary, and then as long as I worked for EAA 21 years, I would never have another anniversary on the day I was supposed to with my wife, because it was always in the middle of AirVenture. So it's memorable for many reasons.
It's a good thing you have an understanding wife.
I do, for sure.
And Gina, we know you from the Aeroshell team, from racing at Reno in the T6. But in the early '80s, you came here with a different mission in mind to Oshkosh.
I came, I believe, in '81, somewhere in there, and my first watching the team fly the Christian Eagles, and Danielle and flying the formation, I just got hooked on that, and I bought a Christian Eagle kit, and then started competing. And I'm an old crop duster, so I had to work for a living, and I had to work usually during the time of EAA, and hardly could get the time off. But when I retired, and by the way, I failed at retirement 3 times, I think now, but I retired and met the boys on the team and joined the team, and we started flying, and we begged Tommy and said, can we come up? And we weren't the Aeroshell team, we were the North American team. And we finally got an invite to come fly, and that kind of started the whole thing, and then we started chasing sponsors and got Aeroshell on board. But my biggest memory with EAA is every year at our ICAST convention, we would go to Tommy and would say, Tommy, you need to do a night show. And he said, oh no, man, we're busy, everybody's committed. And we did that for about 3 years because Sun and Fun was doing a night show. And finally he said, I tell you what, I'm gonna do a night show. And if it fails, you guys will never come back. So I'll never forget our first night show here. Tommy was scared to death, and it went over big time, and now we're doing 2 night shows, and I got to fly in the first night show here with the team and really enjoyed that.
That's excellent. Les, you and your crew, although you weren't here in 1985, you are very familiar with the Concorde and the operations of the aircraft. The airplane was here several times, and I understand you almost were on the crew that brought it here.
Well, it wasn't me, it was Trevor that was almost on the crew. But yeah, the aeroplane's been here 5 times, right. And the Concorde represents the true spirit of the EAA, really, because it's born out of dreams and innovation and lots of hard work to get an aeroplane that flies and does the job that it's meant to do, which was to go twice the speed of sound and take 100 people from London to New York in 3 hours and 20 minutes and make the sun rise in the west, all sorts of things that people dreamt about that you can't do now unless you're in a military aircraft. But Trevor here will tell you about how he nearly came to Oshkosh.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of a sad story. I was due to be on the crew that was going to bring the aeroplane here in the year 2000. It was all organised, all set up. And unfortunately, as everybody knows, the French had a very tragic accident. The aeroplane crashed, and then it was all cancelled. So it never happened, and the aeroplane never came here after that either. Very sad.
And you mentioned this is your first time here. What are the impressions that you have of Oshkosh? First timers?
I've been watching Richard smile all day, so he'll tell you about that.
You got to speak into these things.
All right.
Yeah, just take them all off, and everybody talk into these things. Nobody can hear us.
Any of us.
Everybody.
You can't.
The microphone lady didn't put it in the right place. You're talking at him, and nobody else can hear.
Okay,
Sorry to bug you.
we'll try again. Can you hear?
He's just made up for his late appearance in 1976. Thank you, Harry. So, gentlemen, your impressions now that you've got to walk around the grounds today for the very first time.
Speechless, as you can see. Coming from the United Kingdom, where land is at a premium, I just was absolutely awestruck, or as you Americans would say, it was just an awesome sight. You know, camper vans everywhere, airplanes everywhere. It was just magnificent. We had a cracking day. Didn't we? We enjoyed ourselves enormously.
Yeah, it was just amazing, and we managed to go up in a tri-motor, so we did fly at Oshkosh, even though we couldn't fly our Concorde here this time.
Very good.
And we did see from the air the true scale of the event. It's just amazing. The largest thing we've ever seen in an air show. And we went to plenty of air shows as well as Oshkosh with the Concorde, so we've got lots of experience of that. But it was just, as Richard said, awesome today.
Good. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate all of you taking some time to share some of your Oshkosh memories with us. The 1980s were a very turning point for the organization with Concorde, with Voyager, the opening of the Aviation Center, of course, lots of home builds going through it. So thank you all for joining us this evening and sharing your Oshkosh memories.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let us move one more decade into the history of AirVenture. Doreen Hillard is joining us.
Come on, cheer.
Yeah. Sean D. Tucker. Michael Goulian.
Thank you.
Patty Wagstaff.
Woo!
I get the feeling this segment might have a little bit to do with air shows.
Yeah, probably.
Doreen, you've obviously have a long history with EAA, with Charlie's the leader of the Eagles aerobatic team, and you've been coming to the event since the 70s and now continue to be very intimately involved in the hospitality for all the air show performers. This is one of our unsung volunteers that do such a great job, but they don't get out in the spotlight. So Doreen and her crew in hospitality take care of all the performers, and the air show industry has developed over the years. I know Gino was talking about maybe having some good times in the 70s and things, but these days with the kind of aircraft that you're flying, it is really demanding physically to be able to perform at the level that we are so used to seeing, and actually getting spoiled with watching these absolute world-class performers do what they do every day. And they're speechless.
Well, can I say something, Steve?
Yes.
My first year performing here was in 1992, and I'm as excited today having the opportunity and the privilege to be a performer here. But let me tell you, hanging out with the Eagles aerobatic team, and Danielle and Monty and the Hoove at the Pioneer Inn, it was called So Much Fun. and here's the deal. It was so much fun because we were celebrating our passion for the sky here at EAA, and that's called comradeship. And then we were also celebrating the reverence we had for the opportunity and for the people, and that's called fellowship. And both of those mixed together, and that's why the style of flying has grown and increased, because of friendship and reverence.
Doreen, you were telling me a story about, and it echoes the stories we've already heard about Paul, being everywhere at all times. You said there were times, every time you flew into the event, he always greeted you.
Yes, and not even during the convention, but other times of the year. We'd be flying our Grumman Widgeon or Conquest or Mooney or the Eagle or whatever, and we'd land, and my kids would listen on the radio because we'd hear gonk, gonk, and we'd taxi to the Weeks hangar, and Paul would be there in Red 1, and he'd gonk my kids' noses. Literally every single time, whether it was the convention or during the air show.
And for many years, Charlie was, I guess we'd call him the gatekeeper of performers here at Oshkosh, and there was sort of a process you had to go through to be approved to fly here. And Michael, and I find this hard to believe because you are such an outgoing person.
So I told this story to Doreen tonight for the first time, and I don't know how many people know, but the performers at AirVenture are volunteers, just like everybody else. We come for free, but just like you get a driver's license when you're 16, it's a privilege and it's not your right, even though some people today might think it's their right. Different story. But so at the International Council of Air Shows convention, which Danny Clisham talked about before, we go there every year to basically book your air shows. And I was coming up in the business and was friends with Patty and Sean. But there's two people that I looked up to as basically heroes and had them cut out and glued into a book as a kid, and it was Charlie Hillard and Leo Loudenslager. And I went to my first ICAS in 1990, and in 1995, I had just won the Nationals, and I'm like, I'm starting to fly some air shows. But when Charlie or Leo would walk down the hallway, I would walk on the other side and hope that they wouldn't notice me, or I would, I didn't want to get in their way, and like, here comes God 1 and God 2 down the aisle, and I'm going to get the heck out of the way and make sure they don't notice me. And then, it's like, hey, maybe I could come to AirVenture and fly at Oshkosh. So but I was way too scared to ever ask, God or God's friend if I could ever come to Oshkosh. So I go home, it's almost Christmas, I'm like, I'm going to get the guts up, and I'm just going to call Mr. Hillard on the phone and say, I'd like to come. But two significant things happened in December of 1995. One, I asked my wife out on a date, and two, I asked Charlie Hillard if I could come and fly at Oshkosh. And my wife said yes, and I didn't know about Charlie Hillard. So, so it's a cold December day, and I'm pacing in my room. And at ICAS, you get a book, and it's all the promoters, and there's Charlie Hillard, and here's the work phone number. I'm like, heck, I'm going to give it a call. So I dial this number, and this woman answers the phone on the other end of the line. Hillard Auto. I'm like, hi, Charlie Hillard, please? She's like, senior or junior? I'm like, oh God, I have no idea. I'm like, the aerobatic pilot? Hold on. Right? I'm like, oh God, maybe I should hang up now because they don't know who it is, right? And I'm pacing the floor, and then what seems like 40 minutes later, Charlie Hillard's like, Charlie Hillard. I'm like, Mr. Hillard, my name's Michael Goulian, and I'm an airshow pilot from Boston, and it's been my dream, and I would love to fly at Oshkosh, and it would just be the greatest thing in the whole world if that would be okay, sir. And he's like, Michael, we know who you are, and you're doing just fine, and when the time is right, you'll come and fly at Oshkosh. I'm like, okay, sir, thank you very much, right? And then I was like, guess I'm not going to Oshkosh, but that's okay, right? So, and then like 2 days later, the phone rings, and it's Leo Loudenslager on the phone. It's like, Michael, it's Leo. I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing calling me? And I'm just as nervous and he's like, I just want you to know that you're doing really great things, and just keep doing what you're doing, and you'll be great. And I'm like, okay, thanks. And I think Charlie must have called up Leo and said, this kid's scared to death, maybe you should call him up and make him relax. And then it wasn't until 3 more years later that I actually got to fly at Oshkosh. So I think it's part of the induction thing,
Yeah.
Patty, did you have to go through anything as rigorous as Michael?
I flew the first time here in 1987, and I had just started out, and Dwayne Cole vouched for me. I was flying at Pitts, and he said, I really think you should fly Oshkosh. I'm like, are you kidding me? Fly Oshkosh? I'd been here once as a spectator, and I just started competing, and I was just getting into it, but I was pretty gung-ho. And so Dwayne put in a word for me, and I had a surface level waiver, but they had a rule back then that the first time you fly here, because it is really different flying here than it is at other air shows, and I'll get into that, but that you had to fly at 500 feet the first day, and then if you didn't do something stupid, you could go down to your regular surface level or 250, whatever level you're allowed to go to. So I did okay. I remember my smoke system not working, and I was devastated. I thought, oh my God, this is the horrible thing that's ever happened in my whole life. And because my smoke didn't work. And I was like, Dwayne, my smoke didn't work. Oh, don't worry about it, it's fine. But he vouched for me, and so, I had to make him proud. He really took an interest in helping me, and he was a great mentor and a great coach, and, just a wonderful person. So, so that I didn't fly every year, but I was competing a lot, and I was on the U.S. aerobatic team, and so it was like every other year, I would fly because usually our competitions would, but I wanted to be here. But flying Oshkosh is a huge privilege. It still is. I'm still, hoping that I get invited every year. That probably sounds silly because I've been doing this so long, but I think we all feel that way. And so I'm always like, oh, good, I got the invitation. I'm still okay. And flying here is different for performers, and it has been since I started. It still is. The first time you perform every year, every convention, the performers are more ratcheted up, a little more nervous. It's a little more intense. It's hard to describe, but I used to get really nervous in competition, and I never got nervous flying air shows for some reason. Maybe my first one or two, but I'm just focused. And Oshkosh, I'm always a little nervous the first day when I fly here. And I watch other performers. I know everybody really well, and I know how they fly, and I can see the first day how they ratchet it up, and we kind of watch each other because you're flying in front of 100,000 of your best friends. I always say that. And your peers, and there's so many pilots here. I think they say at most air shows, it's about 18% of people are pilots, they estimate. But here, everybody knows what they're looking at. So it's a lot of pressure on the performer, and that's part of the reason that Oshkosh is so picky and not hiring newbies and people that don't have the experience yet. They want to see them not be so green and get some experience before they come here, because it's a lot of pressure on us, don't you think? So, so I'm glad to be here.
And unlike many other air shows, it's a 7-day event, so it's
oh yeah,
taxing.
You really have to pace yourself. Like this year, I'm flying Wednesday and Friday, so I try and get here on Saturday. This year, I got here yesterday, and with all the sponsor activities we have, and things like this, and all the fun, you want to see your friends. It's really takes a lot of. I prepare for this quite a lot ahead of time. Most air shows, you practice and you do the right thing, but I don't know what social events are until I get there. Oh, we're having a party. Okay. Here, I really have a schedule that I print out for myself. I pack early, and I really try and pace myself really carefully, because by the end of 5 days, you're exhausted. And I don't want to be exhausted on Friday when I have to fly. So, it's
And
all
Sean,
that.
You not only fly air shows, you're also very intimately involved with the Young Eagles program, and trying to encourage youth. So that adds on to your daily activities as well.
I did a photo flight with my co-chairman, Jimmy Graham, today. And I'm very intimately involved in the Young Eagles, because one thing I learned by being an EAA member and being here for so many years at Oshkosh, it's about the community. And one thing about this community, we make the world a better place. This is the most giving, the most generous, compassionate people I've ever met in my life. And to surround yourself with this like-minded people is just so inspiring. And traveling around the country and meeting the coordinators and the volunteer pilots and see how much they give. And what we're really telling America is we love your children. We love your children. And we tell that kid that your dreams are valid. Come with us on this journey. And we're using the metaphor of flight, but it is, and Patty's so right about being nervous. And the reason it's so many levels here, why it's such a reverent place to share a passion. And our passion is flight and elevating above the earth. But we want to make things righteous. And I think I'm so humbled to be a co-chair of the Young Eagles because we started a movement across America. We were first. Greg and Tommy, that was their idea. And we own it. We own the whole deal. We got AOPA involved. We got all the ABC groups involved. And I'm telling you, the last 26 years, I just don't want to screw this up. And so, yeah, I'm very intimately involved. And I love the Young Eagles program. I think it's the most important outreach in America and the most relevant outreach in America. Thanks to you guys.
And it's now, as you're saying, 26 years later, that the seeds that were planted in the 90s and beyond are starting to bear fruit. It was, of course, Facebook lets you stay in touch with everyone. And I saw a post of a friend who had just landed an airline job, and he had a picture of himself in his flight pilot's uniform, and also posted a picture of his Young Eagle certificate from like 1996. Cool. And it was amazing. Yeah. Well, Doreen, I know you don't fly aerobatics, but you do fly. Mm-hmm. And I understand there was a time when you were asked to be the lead of a flight. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of turned out interesting.
Pretty interesting.
I want to hear this story.
Pretty interesting story. Well, there were a few interesting when I was the lead. But I flew a Mooney 231, and it was faster and had more instrumentation than the Eagles. And we were flying from air show to air show across the Midwest. And I had come from Texas in the Mooney, and it was myself, Tommy, Gene, and Charlie in the Eagles, and the B-17 with Paul. And we were flying to an air show, and Tommy was Charlie's right wingman, and Charlie always told people, you know who the right wingman is because he's always right. So it kind of told a little bit about Tom. He was such a perfectionist, which is kind of why EAA is where it is today with a lot of other people. But anyway, we were flying along and we're all on the same frequency, and Tommy kept saying, Charlie, isn't she going too far north? Charlie, shouldn't we be going? And finally I said, you know what? I just went to normal cruise for me, which is a lot faster than them. Didn't say a word, left them. And Charlie got on, he said, thanks a lot, Tommy, you just pissed off my wife. Now we have to navigate, and it was really fun. And I landed, and I thought, heck with those guys. I had a cooler of beer from Texas, getting cold in the back, set it on the wing, drank a beer, and two older gentlemen came out of the hangar. They were World War II pilots, and they were so excited to see me. I had my picture taken with them. They said, I'll be damned, a lady pilot drinking a beer on the wing of her airplane. It was a great day for me.
Always have to respect your lead, right? So what days all of you flying?
I'm flying tomorrow. Right. That's where I want to go to bed. I'm flying tomorrow, Thursday, and Saturday.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm flying Wednesday and Saturday.
And Patty, you're Wednesday and Friday. We'll look for all of you and all the great performers who are here. And just remember that when you see them in the sky, Doreen and her crew are helping make sure they're hydrated and they've got something to eat and they're ready to go. And we really appreciate everything that all of you do to support EAA and to support each other in the aviation community. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. It was a pretty small decade.
Wireless here. There we go.
All right.
Good. Terry Lutz from Airbus, very intimately involved in the A3.
When I walk around EAA, I just see Paul in so very many ways. And in fact, I was astounded when I saw the first video clip, and that he's been gone now for 6 years. If you asked me, I would have said 2 or 3. It just doesn't seem like it, because he is always going to be with us. But his genius was making EAA not about him, not even about airplanes, but about us. And you know, he even said that themselves so many times. Steve can attest to this, certainly, when asked about EAA and EAA members. He said, EAA is about people. It's just the love of airplanes that brings us together. But we do have a man. But we do have a man here that was very close to Steve for close to Paul for a very, very long time. Steve Boos, who of course was chapter manager, Young Eagle manager, and knew Paul and Audrey and Tom, very, very well. Steve, give us a Paul story.
A Paul story. A long time ago, when I was on staff, I wrote the Fridaygram, which was the newsletter that was an internal newsletter for employees. And part of the duties at that time, because there was no email, we actually physically printed them, put a number of them in the mail, and sent them off to the board members and various dignitaries and things like that, and then distribute them internally. And I always, on Fridays, would make sure I took extra time to deliver it first to Paul's office before he retired, and then after he retired, I'd take it out to the farmhouse to Paul and Audrey, and almost invariably every Friday night, they were going somewhere, they were going to go do something on the town, but they always took 5 or 10 minutes just to sit down, tell us about your week, what's going on. So that's one of my favorite Paul stories.
Yeah, that brings up a memory for me, is that Paul would want to see every chapter newsletter. Every chapter newsletter. You can imagine what the stack is with almost 1,000 chapters. But he wanted those delivered to him, and he would read through them, believe it or not. He would remember things from them. He would ask you questions about them. Paul was very, very connected with the membership, with the chapters, with EAA.
Well, you met Paul at the nose of the A380, and Terry, you were very responsible for bringing that airplane here to Oshkosh for the very first time. Tell us a little bit about the inside story to how the airplane got here.
Well, it was really interesting. I've been coming to Oshkosh for quite a number of years, and I moved to France in 2006, and I made it a point to come back every summer. So I'd fly from Europe into Chicago, rent a car, and come up. And so in 2008, when I was here at Oshkosh, I realized that in the United States, there is no other air show like this one, like AirVenture at Oshkosh. The airplanes might be different than what you see at Farnborough and the Paris Air Show and in Dubai and in Santiago, Chile, but this is the air show in the United States of America. So I said, the A380 has got to come here. So I started planting the seeds. I ran into Tom Poberezny in 2008, and I said, Tom, I would really like to bring the A380 to Oshkosh in 2009, but I'm going to need a little bit of help. So what I did was I communicated with Tom. I gave him the contact information for my boss and also for Tom Enders, the CEO at Airbus at the time. And then I began planning on my own, and I started in late in the fall in 2008, and I created what I called the Atlanta Project. And the Atlanta Project was simply a code word to let people know that I was thinking about taking the A380 to Oshkosh. And it made a little bit of sense because Delta is located in Atlanta and they might want to buy an airplane. So, which they didn't do, unfortunately. But what I did was I contacted 4 people. I contacted one of our operations specialists who do a lot of the planning of the missions, the flight planning and finding hotels and all that sort of thing. I contacted one of our performance engineers to make sure that we could actually bring the airplane in and get the airplane back out again. And I contacted our maintenance team to find out what ground equipment that we would need. And the last thing I did was somebody in Human Relations and Public Affairs that had done a lot of air show work with me in the past on other deployments of the A380. So Tom eventually communicated with Airbus management, and the word that I got in January of 2009 that we were not going to bring the A380 to AirVenture. And I was crestfallen. We'd done a lot of work. The work was good. We were ready to go, but it didn't look like it was going to happen. And I thought that, and Tom had told me this as well, that January, February timeframe, that's about the latest time you can schedule to bring something that big into AirVenture. And in March, I was in Miami doing my A320 recurrent training at the Miami Training Center, and I got a phone call from my boss, Fernando Alonso, and he said, "Terry, we're going to take the A380 to AirVenture, and you're going to be the chief of the project." And so what had happened is Tom, the CEO, Tom Enders, had realized that it was the 40th anniversary of Airbus. That's the shirt that I'm wearing because we all had these shirts on for that deployment here to Oshkosh. And he said, we're going to do something really big, and we're going to take the A380 to Oshkosh. So we actually had Tom Enders on the flight from Toulouse to Milwaukee. We staged in Milwaukee, and we came into AirVenture, did the air show on the arrival, and landed and turned in and parked on Aeroshell Square, which it was at the time. Some of the difficulties that we had, I think the biggest one was finding a tug that was big enough to tow the airplane. And if you think about it, you've got two options on runway 18. You've got to either land to the north and turn off on Papa 2 and go right into the square, or you land on runway land on 36 and turn off at Papa 2, or land on runway 18 and have to be either turned around or pushed back to Papa 2. That was the worst case scenario. But the tug that we needed was actually located somewhere on the East Coast. There were only one or two in the United States. And I proposed that to Tom Poberezny, and he said, we'll take care of getting the tug here. And he did that, and it took about 2 weeks to get it transported. It had to come on a special truck, and it came into AirVenture, and it was available for us when we got here. Then I think the thing that really was important about bringing that airplane here was the spirit of EAA really took over, and I'll tell you how it did it. It did it in two ways. The first thing that we wanted to do was show everybody the interior of a flight test airplane, and it's really big inside. And there were a lot of flight test instrumentation, there were some special instrumentation racks, a lot of flight test wiring, I mean huge bundles of wire that were just along the floor. And what we wanted to do was have several stations in the airplane, both on the lower deck and the upper deck, where people could understand what was going on in flight test, but where they wouldn't trip and fall and hurt themselves. So what we ended up having to do was ask EAA if they could provide us some volunteers that would be like guides throughout the airplane. And to be honest, if we hadn't had that, there would probably still be somebody lost in one of our flight test airplanes because it's that big on the inside. So what we ended up with some small plastic tubes that were on some bases, and we had plastic chain from station to station. But the stations were manned by volunteers from EAA. And then we had another problem where everybody wanted to bring their baby strollers and their backpacks and all that sort of thing and bring them up on the airplane. And we realized that there was just going to be too much possibility for clutter, and we didn't know what was in every bag. And so we said, look, we'd like you to leave the bags outside the airplane, and we'll put you on a loop through the airplane, come right back out, you can grab your bags. And it was amazing to us that everybody had no problem with that. There was a designated area, and you looked down from the airplane, and there were 300 bags and strollers and all kinds of things. People just left them there because they knew in this society here at AirVenture that nobody would ever touch anybody's stuff. They would help each other, but they would always be there when they got out of the airplane. I think one of the highlights that I had when I was giving tours of the cockpit of the airplane, I had Bob Hoover in the left seat and Carroll Shelby in the right seat. And if you've ever heard the history of those two guys, they've done a lot of things together all the way back from World War II to the end of their lives. And it was absolutely amazing to hear them for about 30 minutes telling stories in the A380. And then I'd like to follow up with just this one last vignette. The lead flight test engineer on our team coming from Toulouse was Didier Ronceret. And Didier was so moved by the fact that EAA could provide that volunteer spirit and actually get the job done that he painstakingly wrote down everybody's name, took everybody's picture, and eventually was able to recover all of their addresses. When he got back to Toulouse, he created a poster with everybody, every volunteer from EAA was on that poster with their photograph, and he printed those up, found their addresses, and sent each one of them a poster just as a commemoration of what they did to help us with the A380. It was absolutely terrific.
And a very well-received gift from
Yeah.
all the volunteers.
Yeah.
And I remember that year well, because there was a very big army of volunteers that needed to be mobilized to take care of the A380.
Absolutely.
But people absolutely loved being able to be tour guides and have the inside view of the A380.
Yeah, it was amazing. Our people from France absolutely could not believe that that was possible, and EAA made it happen.
Terry, Jeff, thank you very much for sharing your memories of Oshkosh.
Okay.
And we'll look forward to doing
Thank
it
you
again.
very much, Steve. Yeah.
All right, we move into the decade of the 2010s, as we're calling it, and we have two military pilots with us, and I'm not sure how to handle this protocol-wise. Did the Thunderbirds go first or the Blue Angels go first? Ah, okay, all right. That sounds like a good jumping off point. Ryan Bernacki from the Blue Angels, as he mentioned, the Blues were founded in 1946. Welcome back to Oshkosh, and yeah. And Josh Boudreau, who was with the Thunderbirds in 2016 when they were here, and also, if you saw Wild Blue, the RV fly earlier today, he's now a civilian airshow pilot as well. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So Ryan, jet teams had the Snowbirds obviously were here in the 70s, but the two American teams, there were some difficulties in being able to logistically put the show together. How did that first show, that first call go when they said we'd like to put in a bid for having the Blues come to Oshkosh?
Well, I'm not sure how it was with you guys, and actually the Thunderbirds flew the show first. The Thunderbirds flew the show in 2014. We were in 17. When you're boss, there's a lot going on in the background on the team, and so by the time stuff filters up to you, there's already been usually a lot of work, or it's something really big. It comes straight to you. But normally there's all this churn, and so my number 5, Droopy Chamberlain, Ryan Chamberlain, and Dennis Dunbar had been working this for a couple of years, and it was actually Droopy's 4th year on the team. Because of the sequestration year. So he had an extra year, and they had been conspiring to sort out the aerobatic box. And that's really why the Thunderbirds and the Blues have such a hard time getting here, is because the aerobatic box that we require per the FAA is just a little bit bigger, and there's a house right over there, and it takes a lot to get everyone out of those houses. And so in 2017, we had the big box that we needed for a couple hours on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but not Sunday. And so we flew a non-aerobatic show, the first time we've ever done something like that. And interestingly, I'll tell that story. Very, very awkward, because we worked so hard to lock in the shows, high, low, flat, flat roll. But to do a non-aerobatic show, we were allowed to pull G's but not go upside down. We couldn't exceed 90 degrees angle of bank, and so we had to completely break the sequence apart and rebuild it. and we came up with a modified show, and it was pretty uncomfortable. It was my second year. I had a really good number 4, Bub Benson, and he said, yeah, I think we can do it, boss. And then Walleye Weiser was 5, and he said, yeah, we can make it work, boss. But boy, every time we'd turn, it was in a different direction than our normal show, and so a lot of voice inflection, like coming left, like, hey guys, this isn't just a left turn. It would normally be going right here at this point of the maneuver sequence. So it was very awkward, but and we wouldn't have done it for anywhere else. And that's really where the story was going but it's Oshkosh and it's Sunday. We're going to fly. We'll figure this out. And so we started about a week in advance and went through it a bunch of times in the brief, and there was just no way that we were going to not fly on Sunday at Oshkosh. Yeah.
Josh, had you been to Oshkosh before the Thunderbirds flew here?
I do not like to admit this, but I had never been.
It's okay. Everyone has their first time. It's all right.
So my first time at Oshkosh was they shut down. I remember it very fondly. I'm on the left wing, flying formation, and there's this guy, I think at a Bonanza, and he's like, yeah, I'm headed to Oshkosh. And they're like, no, you're not. The Thunderbirds are on their way. So he had to go somewhere else. I kind of felt bad for a half second. Now I'm on the civilian side, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a big deal. But yeah, we show up, and I was like, I don't know what people are talking about. Like, there's this note on apparently that's like 24 pages long that we talked about, but this was pretty easy. You just show up, and you do your thing, and you land, and everyone shows up and greets you. I was like, this is the greatest place in the world. But so that was my first time, and it was weird because I'm a huge aviation buff myself. I started flying when I was really young. At 15 years old, as soon as I got my license, I went to the airport and started taking lessons. I was the last of 5 kids. Had an older brother who really inspired me to fly. So anyway, I show up here, and you can't really move through the crowds too much in your tight blue flight suit. So I changed to my civilian clothes in my car every single day, and I just walk around and just look at every single display, which was pretty cool. And then run over to the car, throw the suit on, and head out to the jet. That was awesome.
So when you were looking at all those airplanes, were there any that caught your eye?
Yeah, so I looked at the velocity, and I walked the rows, and of course everyone's looking at me all weird, and I was like, I really want one of these. I've got, at the time, my wife and I, we just had our 3rd son, and I was like, there's not a whole lot of 5-person, 6-person airplanes. So I looked at the velocities, looked at the Bonanzas, and I would just hang out with people and just ask them questions. And of course, they looked at me like, how come you don't know anything about general aviation? And I was like, well, I want one. I just have never done anything with general aviation. And they're like, well, that's stupid. What do you do? I was like, well, I fly this F-16. And they're like, there's only a couple F-16s here, and they're red, white, and blue. I was like, yeah, I fly one of those. And they're like, oh, come on, come see my airplane. You want to fly it?
Instant credibility.
Yeah, so that was good.
And how did you make the transition from military jets to Wild Blue?
Yeah, so that was an interesting time in my life. No one ever tells you when you leave the team that it is a very weird time. Like you're a Thunderbird. For my case, for 3 years because I went through sequester, and then you just leave, and they're just like, hey, you're just that old guy that won't go away, and like we've got this new team and our new friends, and so I go off to my new job where I'm working at NORAD in Colorado Springs, and I show up, and I'm like, I'm ready to work. And they're like, okay, well, here's your desk, your weapons and tactics, and you're going to basically defend America and Canada from Russian aggression. And I was like, great, cool. When do I get to fly? They're like, oh, no, you don't get to fly anymore. You have to work this desk. And I was like, well, that's bullshit. So I was like, I'm not doing it. So I was like, well, I'm going to go to the Aero Club, and I'll start flying there. So I go to the Aero Club and fly, and we start this aggressor program. Anyway, my friend Jive Kirby, who I met on the air show circuit when I was a Thunderbird, calls me. He's like, hey, I see you're flying general aviation. I was like, yeah, apparently I didn't have enough experience. So I went out and started flying GA. And I would go to Alaska. I'd go all over the country and just read the book, read the manual, get in and fly it around. It's amazing what the government will let you do. So anyway, he's like, hey, you want to come fly my airplane? And I was like, sure. He's like, do you want to know like the details? I was like, no, where do you need me? So he's like, well, Sun and Fun's coming up. Meet me down at Sun and Fun 2 days prior. So I show up at Sun and Fun, and he shows me this RV, and I was like, great. Shows me how to start it. We go out for a 30-minute flight, come back and land, and then he's like, all right, take it up. Go do whatever you want. I was like, can I spin it? He's like, sure. I was like, okay. You recover it like the same as the military tweet? And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I was like, okay, cool.
Pretty sure.
You got a parachute, it's no big deal. And then the next day, I got to fly with Mike Goulian, and he certified me, and EAA and ICAS and everyone that's involved in that whole process had enough confidence, and they're like, you were a military jet pilot, we're just gonna certify you at 250 feet, you're good. And I'm like, great, this is awesome. So I'm at this camp, and I'm having a great time, and everyone's like, oh, that was a terrible day, like the weather, the winds, and everything. And I'm like, I had a great time. And they're like, oh, well, you're new, you're at 800 feet. I was like, no, they gave me this 250-foot card, so I guess I'm good, right? So, yeah, it's been a blast. I've flown it all over the country. I'm supposed to go to Alaska next year. I don't know if I really understand what I signed up for. I flew from, I think, Georgia to Las Vegas one day. And my buddies are flying over, and I hear Thunderbird 1 checking in, you know, and of course they're on UHF and I'm on VHF, and they check in with center, and I'm like, hey, let them know that Tater's down here flying, and they were quickly out of the airspace and home about 6 hours before me, but yeah.
But you had a much better view of the countryside.
Sure, yeah. So it's just like an F-16. You know, you don't have a KC-135 giving you gas, and you don't have a 130-person crew back at home to take care of it. But yeah, same thing. Same thing.
Ryan, we talked about the different show that you put on, but how is Oshkosh different from all the other air shows that the team goes to?
Oh, wow, thanks. That's a great question, Steve. So my arrival actually was a little different. We came in, Rob Ryder was singing the national anthem, and we came in from west to east, and the airspace was ours, so that was easy. I came in over the crowd this way, and then we turned out and came into the pitch-up break on 3-6, and we're doing our thing and come in and land. And I touch down, and the parked airplanes in the crowd start all the way down there, and by the time I got all the way to where we park at the off the end of 3-6, I was so blown away by the size of that crowd, and it was a Wednesday, morning or something. Everybody's out waving, and I got out of the jet, and I picked up my cell phone, I pulled it out of the little tiny pockets we have, and I call my wife, who was in Idaho. We lived in Pensacola, where the team's based. My wife was in Idaho with our kids and visiting family, and I said, "Baby, you got to get out here." And so I said, "I'm serious. Like first thing tomorrow, leave the kids with family and get here." And she was on a plane into Green Bay the next day, and we had a really magical time. And so that was just my first impression. From overhead, the RVs you can see from miles out, and then there's airplanes everywhere, and everybody was just so welcoming. And so when I tried to think about how is this show different, let me see if I can explain it. So we do some really big shows. Both teams do. Chicago, San Fran, Seattle, Miramar. There's hundreds of thousands of people. And then we do these really small shows, maybe somewhere in the Midwest or down in the South or whatever, and maybe there'll be 30,000 people there. And the small shows are great because you really get to know people. You have a much more intimate interactions. You get to spend more time with the kids. You have this really great feeling. And then the big shows are great because they're the big stage, and the buildings are whizzing by, and it's awesome. But you don't really have that connection, it's this big production. And Oshkosh is both things together. It's the biggest show, the biggest, and the most connected, most intimate, the respect, the knowledge. Everybody here is so passionate about flying, and they were so welcoming. And my experience was a little different. I actually walked around in my flight suit one day, and it was awesome. I took some pictures here and there, and mostly just shook hands. And lots of people just wave and say thanks, and I couldn't believe that. It was just, we were just all among friends, and we're all in it together. And, from the young kids all the way up, and I'd started too. My dad flew he flew yesterday, a Mooney 201, and I'd started flying when I was a teenager as well. And so I believe in this whole thing that, some of our predecessors on the stage tonight were talking about how important it is to give back and to inspire, and then you see it happening here. You know, the generations, the kids flying in with their parents, or just parents that bring their kids here to have them experience this. And the whole thing is just so magical. But I felt like, I think it was Patty that said, you're here with 100,000 of your friends. And even though the numbers are much bigger, you feel like you're friends with everybody. And so to have the biggest stage and then that closeness was what made it so magical for me. And I absolutely loved every minute of it. Yeah.
Well, Josh, Ryan, thank you for spending some time with us this evening and sharing some of your Oshkosh memories. Are you flying any more this week?
No, I actually go home tomorrow, so I got to bring the airplane to the next show, and then I'm flying an F-16 on Wednesday. So,
I have to deliver an air show airplane and then fly an F-16. Yeah, life is tough.
So I'm still active duty. Yeah, I'm just on leave. But my boss, former Thunderbird 5, he's bringing 4 F-35s. So, yeah.
More noise. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. The Blue Angels were here, Thunderbirds were here, and we're hoping that the teams will come back in the future. But we're going to kind of conclude this segment with the team, with a representative of the team who was here first in 1976, and that's the Canadian Snowbirds. Naughty McNaughton was here a couple of years ago with the Snowbirds, and he sent a little video message for all of us in the audience tonight.
I'm Captain Blake McNaughton, instructor pilot with Canadian Forces 431 Air Demonstration Squadron. And a couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to go to AirVenture 2016. I remember getting there, and as we flew in the pitch, looking down and seeing 10,000 neatly lined up airplanes, and the conversations were giddy over the radio between the Snowbirds. And then landing on the green dot was a dream come true. Congratulations, AirVenture, on your 50th anniversary, and thank you for including the Canadian Forces Snowbirds as part of your legacy. We look forward to being back sometime again in the future, and maybe this year, take a look over in Vintage, and you might see this beautiful jet again.
Well, we sincerely appreciate you spending your evening with us. We're not quite done yet, but we want to take maybe a little moment to look forward and like to bring on to the stage the CEO and chairman of EAA, Jack Pelton.
Thanks, Steve. Well, it's been a great discussion. I mean, the history and all those legends that have been here has been really exciting.
Yes, it has. Some interesting stories told tonight. And unfortunately, you couldn't be backstage to hear some of the other stories that they were telling before we came on the stage. But they were it's entertaining as well. And I know each and every person who comes to this event goes away with memories that really do last a lifetime. And I know when I was working here, there would always be people who say, well, it's not the same as it was in the good old days. And I remember Paul saying, the good old days is the first time you're here, and then everything else after that may or may not stack up. And I think he was right, because the first time you were here, the Oshkosh makes such an impression on you that it just doesn't go away.
It doesn't. And I remember my first time here in 1977 with my dad. I was a newly minted private pilot. He was a member of EA Chapter 1, and we lived in Southern California. We came out in his Cessna 140A. It took us 2 days to get here. And we'd always, as members, we'd read about it, we were aware of it, you see the magazine, and you knew you had to make that trip to Mecca, if you will, at some point. And you get here and you're just, you cannot believe, it's sensory overload with aviation. And fortunately for me, it's stuck, and I spent an entire career in it.
And what are we looking forward to in the future? We've 50 years or 50 fly-ins in Oshkosh. What do the next 50 look like?
You know, I think as we listen to everybody that spoke before, the most important thing we have to look forward to is how do we continue to preserve the culture that Paul started. I think that is what makes this thing so special. It's what makes EA unique, and we have to stay focused on making sure that it's all about the people first. So that's a tough challenge, and I think all of us at EA are committed to ensuring that continues to happen. As far as where the show goes, I kind of look back to '77 and say, yeah, it is getting too big. It kind of missed that. But we have to kind of roll with the times and be flexible with what the members want. Today, looking around, the interesting part was we're starting to see younger families, and I think that's important, is how do we become relevant to the younger generation that needs to replace all of us as EA members. So it's it's a tough duty, but it's one that I couldn't be more proud and honored to carry on for Paul and Tom.
And if we go back to 1970, there was a brochure that Paul had sent to all the members in 1970 with hotel information and campground information and for this new location. And in it, he says, we need to earn the respect of the community and to become part of the community. And this past weekend, I think that really showed that as people from the Oshkosh area understood that there were many campers who had nowhere to go because of the rain, and they joined the Facebook group and started saying, hey, I have room in my side yard. Some of them said for $20 or $30 if you want electricity, but some just said, if you need a place to stay, come to my house. And I think that really is a statement for the ages of how Oshkosh and EAA have really become one.
It is. Now that I've gotten kind of ingrained into the community, you know, it's 68,000 people. And all of a sudden we bring to them, you know, 3 times their city. But what we bring is that culture that we see and live here. And it's just refreshing to hear the stories from all the businesses and the people in town who talk about how special people from EAA are. And I think it's something, if we could bottle this up and have the world be like it, we'd be in a hell of a lot better place than we are today.
I think so. Before we close tonight's program with some words from our founder, any last thoughts that you have this evening as we close out day 1 of AirVenture?
I think first of all, thank you everybody for your patience in us getting through to day 1, because we had a wild ride from Friday till Monday, which we were very nervous that this was going to be tough to get going. But again, the resilience of EA members and the fact that everybody wants to be here was fantastic, and we're going to continue to serve and make it a good week for everybody. Thank you for the clap. But again, the other key to this has been the volunteers. We talk about the 50th consecutive AirVenture in Oshkosh, but when I was out in the campgrounds all throughout, and the grounds all throughout the storms that we were having, the concerns, we had tornadoes nearby, they still don't have power in Appleton, which is only 20 miles away, and watching volunteers helping other members because they wanted to make sure people had the right experience. Vividly, it was about 7 o'clock at night, there's one of these enormous 45-foot motorhomes, the mud is up to your ankles, and 2 gentlemen on a John Deere with tires that are about 15 foot high. The first guy dives into the mud with rope to get under the axle of this massive motorhome, which first of all, I'm asking him, oh good God, I hope the air ride system doesn't collapse and I see the end of the vendor. But the volunteers jumped on it, pulled it out, and I went over to thank them, and I said, you know, that was amazing. And they said, we got a list of 25 more, and my only objective here is to make sure that everybody has a good time. And I think that just kind of sums up what this is all about.
Jack, again, thank you for joining us, and we thank all of our panelists. And as I said, we're going to close with some words of wisdom from Paul Poberezny.
I think I enjoyed the people more, and I was very enthusiastic about the future of the organization. It's a family reunion of people who love aviation. Actually, EAA is an aeronautical, educational, social organization. And if you take any one of those 3 items away, you're not. You have to have that social aspect of bringing people together to enjoy themselves, enjoy swapping information, and the family aspect through, and being brought there by aviation. This organization has changed a lot of lives. But I always like to be with people, and I've always said if you don't love people, you'll never be a success no matter what your talents are. Because we all know that we always can't be there at the end of time. And I hope the little that I've given to my life, I'm proud that I've been able to fly some 72 years. Been able to build a number of airplanes and do some design. And I have so many wonderful friends. That because of EAA, I got to be a millionaire. I got a million friends, and you can't buy that with money. And I wish you all well, and though I'm not there with you, I'm there with you in spirit.
Some of the many faces who have helped to build this organization and this event, and who have gone west, and now it's up to us to build the next 50 years of EAA at Oshkosh. Thank you for being here this evening. Have a great trip back to the campground or wherever you're staying, and we'll see you all out on the flight line bright and early tomorrow morning.